Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are coming from. It's a new year, guys. It's a new year. I am so excited. 2026. It's going to be my year, I think, or something like that. So I am attorney Kevin. I am here this morning. So you guys may have heard of if you're Tampa Bay based, company called Benchmark International a lot recently. Maybe you've seen their beautiful signage, which I really like how you guys did it too, where it kind of at night it'll kind of light up across the board on the arena, obviously where the Lightning play. So I had to reach out to Dara Shareef, the managing shareholder of Benchmark International. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So, I got a lot of questions and stuff, and obviously we have some ties. We, by the way, are not going to read any Facebook viewer comments. So
Okay,
all of
good.
you, we'll scold them behind the camera, but you guys are, not you hang out with an interesting crowd, my friend. You do. But all jokes aside, there were so many people and so much kind of scuttle in Tampa Bay about Benchmark International. Who are these guys? What do these guys do? So that's why I was so excited to kick off the year and start off this episode with Dara to kind of explain, who they are, what they do, their community ties to Tampa, all the great things that they do and get involved. And yeah, man, tell us a little bit about yourself, Benchmark. Let's kind of get things kicked off.
Sure. Well, I appreciate the forum, Kevin. So Benchmark's been around for about 15 years in the U.S., started in the U.K. Our primary founders came over about 15 years ago to move to the U.S. because, well, they're British and the Brits love Disney World. So they sort of, this corridor from Manchester to Orlando, it's like one of the cheapest flights on the planet.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so they spent a lot of time here. So they decided to retire here and realized quickly they couldn't retire. So they started Benchmark in the U.S.
That makes sense now more than ever. Yeah, absolutely.
So they had done this business before. They sold it, realized they couldn't work for anyone. So they started Benchmark. So, we've been around for about 15 years. I've been there 11 of those years.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I was in venture capital and all that kind of stuff. Probably not worth going into.
I do want to mention though, just with your background and not to hype you up too much, obviously, but just to give a little bit more info about you, I do obviously research on my guests and things, and I watched another podcast that you did. So during your venture capital days, you wore a lot of hats though. I mean, you were jumping into these companies, seeing these processes from real life. So it's not like, you're, kind of pointing fingers and do this and do that and look at these charts. Your history, you were living and breathing these companies that you guys were acquiring, whether you were jumping in a CFO role or VP role or something like that, correct?
Yeah, so I was early stage VC in upstate New York.
Okay.
So, the notion that that's an ivory tower is, I would disabuse you of that notion. So, when something went wrong, we went in and helped fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And inevitably, the founder is not the person to take it from, they could take it from 0 to 10 million in revenue. Unlikely they can take it to 100 million in revenue. So at some point, you often will find that the founder has to become like an evangelist in the business. And you bring in a growth CEO. And sometimes you need to come step in for short moments and kind of handle that for, while you're looking for a actual real CEO. I mean, I've done those roles. I wasn't very good at them, but I've got experience doing them. I enjoyed that. I've been a CFO, a CEO, and a COO of different businesses over the course of my career, always in my 30s. I was probably too young to do it, but I learned a lot.
Well, I'm 34, and you know a little bit of my background, so I think age is just a thing at these days.
There you go.
Touching back on that a little bit, and I want to highlight that. So I, consume a lot of content, et cetera, a lot of business content. And I want to say this to the audience, I guess as tastefully and humbly as possible. Growing a company, growing a good idea, we'll call it, to 0 million, 0.5 million, 0 to 10 million is probably where it gets harder, but it's not. With the right team, maybe a 5 to 10 man team, it's in the right product, et cetera, and a little bit of grit and grind, that's not probably too difficult. And I think people undervalue growing that 10 to 25, 25 to 50, and ultimately the new benchmark, no pun intended, is kind of the 100 million. So can you kind of highlight a little bit about that and the thought process that kind of goes into that? So let me kind of even dial that in even more. What realization do you have to see that founders have to come to bring in a growth CEO or bring in venture capital or things like that?
Okay, so that's a pretty rich topic.
Okay,
I think when you start a business, I think what you're trying to do is your first goal is to make it self-sustaining.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you infuse it with some of your own capital and your own sort of horsepower. and you're trying to get it to the point where you don't have to put more money in. That's your first goal. You're not trying to build it to
Really?
sell at that
That's
point.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's the first thing you're trying to do. So when you're trying to grow it after that, so now it's a sustainable business, right? It's actually making money and it's earning its own keep. You're adding team members. It doesn't scale in a linear way. It can't,
Mhm.
right? So if you grow 10% per year in revenue, you can't add 10% of a finance person.
Mhm.
You can't own, you can't cut people in half and add them to your business. So, you sort of grow like this in terms of revenue, but your cost basis goes like this,
Mhm.
right? So you're sort of
We've
behind
seen
and
it.
ahead,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
It's kind of how it works. When you're trying to get to that point where you're moving toward an exit, the most important thing is to make sure that the business can survive you. What does that mean? Well, if you hold all of the relationships, if you're making all the key decisions, if you haven't pushed down to lower levels of management, the key relationships, the decision making, the sort of intellectual horsepower of the business, if you haven't done that, the business is essentially a one-man band with a lot of sidekicks, right? What you want to do is be able to take a cruise for a month and a half in Europe and have it not miss a beat. That's when you know your business is ready to survive you. And most businesses don't. I mean, there's a huge amount of businesses in the country that do not survive that first generation. And, that's the tragedy of it all. So if you want to build a business to survive you, you have to make sure you make yourself as unimportant as possible. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's the only way that business can survive without you being there.
And to your point though, I mean, I've lived that, and I've had conversations. We just, not to name drop, but we just had Kevin Harrington on, a fantastic episode, and he was talking about personal branding versus creating other people's brands. So he had the Tony Littles and he had the Billy Mazes and things like that, and he had talked to one of his mentors and said, "Hey, why is Billy getting the call, or why is Tony getting the call? Why am I not getting the call?" And he's like, well, because you have to build that personal brand, and I want to combine that with what you're saying is you have to be able to remove yourself and be known where your company's able to survive and your brand is able to thrive, et cetera, et cetera. So I see it's a classic issue in law firms, not to, obviously go down that path, but when it's, Smith and Associates, and you don't have that pool of individuals that are coming up and rising through the firm, the firm just stops, surviving. It stops operating, et cetera. So that's a very good point. And it's obviously very, very difficult to founders because it's almost like a child or a baby or a family member you could
Yep.
equate these businesses to. But I do want to stress that to the audience that if you want to grow, it is so important to find a great team and figure out how can I daily remove myself as much as possible while maintaining some growth, while maintaining the integrity of the brand and the business, and keep on moving forward.
Yeah, I think you want to be a lever. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's the goal. I mean, my goal is to make other people better.
Yeah.
And I want to hire people who are smarter than me. That's not that high of a bar. I mean, I've got a lot of people who work for me who are way smarter than
Why
I
do you
am.
think I'm with Ian Levingood?
Well,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. But, I want to be a lever. I want to empower people to be better at what they do. If I can be in some way a lever for them, I've done my job.
Well, a lot of people too, and I'm sure you've seen it from a CEO or a leadership level, that there are some people that are just not. They're different adjective of CEO. Maybe they're a
Yeah.
visionary. Maybe they are operational. Maybe they are finance based things. Things of those nature. So you have to eventually build a team that will complement you to be able to obviously grow the business. Like, me, for example, I don't want to crunch numbers all day, but Mike handles that side of the business. My partner, Mike Boyle, I gotta shout him out, or he's gonna, I'm never gonna live it down.
Yeah.
But we all, if you wear too many hats, then, for lack of better terms, I guess your head gets heavy.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think you want to
yeah.
make an assessment of, you have to do a self-assessment. What are my skills? How do I add value? And then figure out what's missing to get to the point where you're really achieving.
And don't equate it as a
Yeah.
weakness. It's
Oh,
making you
right.
stronger.
Of course. So and then you do the gap analysis. So here are my skills. Here are the skills needed for us to succeed. What's that gap in the middle? And then you hire, right, senior people to address those whatever you want to call them, but the things you don't do very
Yeah.
well. Make sure you hire for that, and you empower those people to to make key decisions, and you get the hell out of their way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You got to let people succeed. Jumping into some of the questions as well that I've had, when how should a founder decide, because that's what you guys do is the mergers and acquisitions, and you guys do from inception until sales. So you guys do the due diligence period, the LOI, the letters of intent, all the different processes, run through the financials. You really support these businesses from my understanding, and kind of handhold them along to the finish line. How does a founder decide whether they're going to sell, they're going to hold, or maybe they acquire somebody else? How does that thought-making process go? Or how do you encourage that?
Yeah. So I think if you're deciding to sell your business because of something happening in the external market,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, hey, it's frothy valuations, like cost of capital is low, like they maximize your valuation. That's the wrong reason to sell, in my view.
Really? Okay.
The reason to sell has got to be something that's more tied to your life. I mean, at some point, these folks are already making good money. They're already somewhat wealthy. And at some point in your life, your time has to be more valuable than your money. So if you sell for $50 million or $32 million, how does that impact your life? It probably doesn't impact your life. You're better off selling when you're ready to sell, right? So I have a client who experienced a loss just yesterday, and he wants to revisit some offers, and
Mm-hmm.
that happens, right? So it's usually something in your life that happens, or your brother gets ill, or those kinds of things, or you start
These
realizing
epiphanies that occur. Yeah.
you have this moment where you realize, oh yeah, I didn't go to the football games with my kids, or I missed all the school plays, and it's time for me to recapture that and see if I can start spending my time, whatever time I have left, and tomorrow's not guaranteed, with the people we love. Yeah, because I know this. This is a fact. I believe if no one at the end of their life wishes they had held the business an extra year or two and captured, another 2 times EBITDA on the sale. They wish they had spent more time with the people they love. So if you're making a decision on selling your business based upon anything other than what you're trying to achieve in your life, I think you're making the wrong call.
And I think, personal opinion on my end, just, looking at other businesses and watching, young people like me and stuff, I think they forget that they may have hit a finish line, and they just keep pushing the chips to the middle,
Right.
So it's like, hey, we do, we're worth $100 million. Why? Who cares if you get to two?
Right.
Like, does it really, and I say that obviously, again, humbly and respectfully to the audience, but it's like, you're, say you're 35 or 40 years old and you have $100 million company. Is it really gonna really, you get a little bigger yacht, a little nicer plane? I mean,
Right.
at that point,
I think for a lot of people, they tie their identity to the business,
oh,
and,
of course.
and rightfully so. I mean, and some people have children and some don't, and whether you
Mm-hmm.
do or you don't, this is something you sort of, you built from the ground up, and it's very hard to separate your personal identity from that of this business owner. And, you probably experienced that. You've tied yourself to a business,
Oh,
and,
100%.
at some point you're going to extract yourself, and it's going to be really hard. It's going to be like remove it. It's like when your child goes away to college. I have that coming in a few months. I'm dreading that. I'll
No,
tell
I
you
get
that.
it. I get it.
But that's that same sensation. Like this is part of who you are. I'm Kevin. I'm the lawyer, and I'm Dara. I'm an M&A guy at Benchmark International. At some point, that's not going to be, and I'm going to have to change how I view myself, how I tell the world who I am, and that is devastating. After 30 years, that is devastating for people. So it's not easy, and so at some point, you have to figure out a way to compartmentalize and to separate your personal identity with your business profile and recognize there's value in both, and it's okay to let go of one. And so what I talk about when you're selling your business, you're looking to monetize your life's work, and you're looking for a caretaker of your legacy. And I think both are equally important to our clients.
I was lucky enough to see it with my father recently. He retired, and he keeps in contact with a couple folks from work and things like that he worked with. But I mean, he was in contact with hundreds, if not thousands, of people. He did real estate for Xerox, so he was in contact with numerous people daily.
Hmm.
And I said to him, do you talk to a lot of people? And he goes, nah, I mean, a handful of people in here or there reach out and stuff. And it was just kind of hit for me, like the old saying that, once you go from this, business world or beyond, you probably won't deal with a lot of the people that you deal with. So you may as well make your personal life as important and as fruitful and as rewarding as you can. What do you see that separates companies from getting a higher evaluation from those that may not?
Yeah, I think it's some of the things I talked about. So, one, it's industry, obviously. I
Obviously,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
if
If we're
you're,
talking apples to apples, like,
yeah,
if somebody was trying to sell a plumbing company, for
yeah,
example, what would you, or some type of services business, we'll say
yeah.
it, what would you say is like, hey, we see, maybe these handful of factors that these other companies don't have, and therefore they get more.
Yeah, so I think it's the company that's built to succeed the owner, right? So, having that secondary level of management that can really handle the work of the business, owns all the relationships. We talked about that a little bit. That's probably the most important piece. I think customer concentration is always, a concern. So if you've got 80% of your revenue from one customer, it's a very unattractive profile for
Oh
a buyer.
yeah, that's scary.
The way you can mitigate that is to sell it to a buyer who already is in that business, and they can mitigate it instantly because they've got a broader customer base. But still, you're less valuable to almost any buyer than someone who has no customer more than 5% of the revenue, right? So if you can, it's hard to turn down work, as you know. So that's the conundrum for a small business. It's like, okay, Walmart's 80% of my, but it's consistent, and it's consistent every year, and it's been 20 years. And should I say no to work? I mean, I need to. I've got employees, and I've got to feed my family, and I'm trying to grow the company. And so it's a real conundrum, but it's more valuable if you've got a more diverse customer base, right? So, companies that don't rely on a single source supplier, right? Because the single source supplier can absolutely decide, hey, I'm going to hijack your business, and I'm raising prices by 20%.
Hmm.
Or tariffs, right? So you have these sort of like exogenous forces that can take your business down if you're not built to sustain it, right? So the one that has the best customer relationship, right, has what's called stickiness, right? A sticky customer is one that's not going to switch, or high switching costs, when prices go up. Well, think about what's going on right now with some of the cost pressure on, because of tariffs, because of sort of a movement to onshoring versus the sort of globalized supply chain we've had for 50 years. That's changing, and if you can't survive these shocks to pricing, because your customers are just going to sort of leave when you pass along that price increase, you're less valuable than that person who has that customer in hand, who can pass along that price increase that you're experiencing to the customer. That's way more valuable. And I think in this year especially, we're going to see a lot of that. Those companies that have sticky customer relationships, that have diverse suppliers, that aren't sort of commoditized in terms of the service, those are the ones that are survive, not the ones that are high growth companies. It's the ones who can prove year after year that they've got favorable margins, and they can survive these exogenous shocks.
Well, to your point, the consistency, and also maybe a proof system or examples of, hey, here's how we've dealt with this in the past. 5 years ago, they raised our prices, by 20% because of
Right.
X. Here's how we, went through that, analysis, corrected, course corrected, and moved on. And then the other thing that keeps on, not to put words in your mouth, that it seems to be consistent in what you're saying is you need to have a strong middle management.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, those seem to be the difference makers between, being here and being here, as that strong decision making level below the C-suite, or at
Yeah.
least somewhat dispersed throughout the company. Why do some founders just hold until the end of time? They're like, I am, and which is probably not the most healthy thing, leaving a, God forbid something happens, leaving a spouse or children to navigate a sale or taking on this
Yeah.
business. But why do they hold on until, you know, the music stops?
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to be a broken record here, but I think it is that identity.
Hmm.
If you've built your entire identity around you as a business owner,
I'm Stu's Plumbing. Yeah.
right? I mean,
And
well,
I've been Stu's Plumbing for 40
it's
years.
think of The Office. Bob Vance
Yeah,
Refrigeration. I
yeah,
mean,
of
that's who he
course.
is. That's
Mhm.
who that guy is, and that's okay. It's okay, but I don't know that it's really healthy
Mhm.
to not have that sort of secondary identity. So if you think about it, you go to work, you build relationships with folks. If you're there 50 years, like, these people are your family,
Mhm.
right? So you go home to your family, but you have this family, and how do you all of a sudden sort of say, okay, I'm going to turn the page? Some people just can't do it, and it's the people who tie their identity, almost entirely, their self-worth, not even identity, but their self-worth, to that business. If they've got a great business, that's why they're great. That's why they're
Mhm.
good people, is because that
it's a
business.
double-edged sword.
It absolutely is, and I think it's tragic.
Yeah.
It is. It's tragic because they're not doing it because for any, ill will, nothing foul about why they're doing it. They're doing it because this is who they are, and they don't think they exist in any other plane. Whereas the way I look at it, I've got a separate identity away from the office. In fact, I don't I've got no friends on Facebook from the office. I never have. I don't make real personal relationships with folks I work with
Mhm.
because it's my way of sort of bifurcating it. Because we may part company with somebody at some point. If they're a really good friend, I don't want to make a decision that's not good for the business
Mhm.
based upon a friendship, and
It's hard to mix business and friendship,
it
of course.
is, and I've never been able to do it effectively, and
Mhm.
it's probably because I've always worked in small businesses. If I work
Okay.
for GE or something, I mean, it's different, right? You have friends and there's 20,000 people on the campus. That's different, but I work for businesses that are not very big, so I've chosen to kind of keep that separate, and I think that's been healthy for me, and so my identity sure, I part of my identity is who I am as a business person, and I'm proud of that. But I'm more proud of, my family and my kids, and that part of me is, and I like having a good time. I like to tip a glass once in a while, as your brother-in-law would know, my brother-in-law, your partner would know. I'm a different guy at home than I am at work, and while I do answer emails and I am plugged in most of the time, I do disconnect as much as I can and really separate the two.
I've gotten better with it over the years. Having kids has definitely helped a lot.
Yeah,
And it's I think you just get more confident too over time to be able to, like you said, and we've continually hit on having people that you work with that you can trust. I know that if I go take a vacation, that I can rely on, Mike or Ian, maybe Richard, probably Peter. I'm kidding. We love Richard, but and then obviously the team there and stuff, and that's been wonderful over the last 2.5 years. Is like I know business is still going to be conducted. Why I, do these other things that make me happy or spend time with my family. And then on the other side of that too is, like you said, finding a separate identity where every win is not tied to work.
right.
And I did, a young guy and coming up and obviously only so much experience. 90% of my wins were, oh, we settled this case. Oh, we signed this client. Oh, we did this, we did that, we won this motion hearing, et cetera. And I found, somewhat recently, and that's why I started like running and things like that, more fitness, et cetera. I'm like, I need other challenges
Yeah,
outside of work, that'll keep me growing, keep me, maybe outside of the office a little bit. And then I have young kids. They're now heading into that, sports and
yeah.
school activities and things like that. So I'm excited for that next chapter. With that being said, what is some advice or how do you educate founders on starting to separate themselves from the brand?
It's not easy.
It's a delicate conversation, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
it isn't easy. I mean, I think you start
Stu,
small.
you're too involved. Okay.
That's right. I think you start small. I mean,
Hmm.
I think there are some that don't take any vacations. So it's like, okay, go take a vacation. Like, but just do me a favor, take a vacation for a week, leave your phone off, and let's see how the business survives, right? Let's delegate somebody in the firm. I know you don't think there's anyone who can handle it. Delegate somebody for a week. Well, okay, you can't do a week, do a long weekend.
Hmm.
Let's start with a long weekend and see what happens. And that's what I would do. I don't tend to have that
I
conversation with
tell my
very
team
many
to yell
people.
at me. I'm like, that's,
Yeah,
I'm like, I'll send little emails or stuff. We're big Disney folks and stuff. And
yeah.
it's, I'll send a little email or a text or take a call and stuff. They're like, stop answering the phone. We got it. So,
So I'm wired
but yeah,
differently though. So I do
starting
that.
small. Yeah.
So I mean, when I'm at Disney or whatever, and my kids don't, well, they still want to go, but we went to Disney a lot back in the day,
Yeah.
and I've closed deals on Disney. I mean, at Disney, like,
Settled
yeah.
cases.
So
Yeah.
and frankly, if I didn't do that, it would create way more stress in my life. There are some people who put the phone down when they're on vacation and they don't look at it, and they go back to just a horror show when they're back in the office because they've got 12,000 emails and all these things that didn't get done. And I'd rather handle it in that moment, right? So take 5 minutes away and say, Kim, I'm going to take 5 minutes, or I've got a 30-minute call, whatever it is. And, we'll go on the hike, an hour later, right? But I've finished this. It's done. I don't have to stress about it. I don't worry about what's not happening when I'm not there. I have a great team and they do great work. And there are a lot of folks who are, handling basically everything at work. But there are things that require my attention. And if I just say, hey, I'm not going to do it for the weekend I'm away, that creates way more stress for me than actually handling it in real time. That might take 5 or 10 minutes.
There's so much competition in our business, of course, that, group texts have been everything
Yeah.
and excuse me, luckily my wife is very understanding where I can, again, take a 5-minute call if I need to. Hey, client Susie, we're going to get this taken care of. And I'm out of the office today in all transparency, but I'm going to put you in a group text with X. They're going to get this looked into. And then I'm going to make sure if it's not followed through with, it's going to be handled on Monday. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The people that completely disconnect, I agree with you. It's like, you want to come back after vacation on Monday to 9 fires? That's not fun.
No, it's not.
So again, back to the question, it's just starting small. And again, like you said, hey, take a small weekend. Hey, I know one thing that I've seen others do is they write down everything that they do in a day and then see who they can assign it to. So it's like, okay, what's non-refutable and what's non-delegable rather, and what is, and then starting to get more and more things off their plate. Not going into a little bit of negative here, not so happy topic, but what is the most common reason for deals falling apart?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are a lot of reasons why a deal can fall apart. And I'm going to focus on in diligence, right? So
Please.
it's signed an LOI. Now we're going through diligence, and it's usually either the quality of earnings turns up something in the earnings stream that it didn't prove out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something that was not easy to see. These guys do a real forensic analysis of, they go absolutely down to the general ledger and look at 100,000 transactions and prove out the earnings stream. And
I'm sure interviewing people as well, and a lot of other processes too.
they go through quite a process. But this is just the quality of earnings, and that often will uncover some deviation, and it'll lead to either a retrade. Hey, that it's not 4 million in EBITDA, it's 3.5. That's a $500,000 times 9 times multiple. It's $4.5 million.
It's a big deal. Yeah,
right. So
material.
So that's one reason it falls apart. Lack of funding. Right. So the best way to fund a deal, the most efficient way, is to lever the transaction. You think of a fund buying a business, right? Their cost of equity is in the 20s. That's their hurdle rate for their equity. The cost of debt is high single digits now. So if you can fund half of the deal with your equity, half of it with debt, you've cut that overall cost of capital dramatically. Think of like 8% and 22%. Now you're
what do you got? 14% blended?
15%, right? At a weighted average cost of capital, if you're at 50-50, it makes way more sense to lever the transaction. Oh, by the way, you've sort of doubled your dry powder as a fund. So it makes all
and
the
they're
sense
making
in the world.
5 to 7 points on it if they're getting over the hurdle rate. I mean,
Well, so what their focus is like a MOIC or a multiple on invested cash of 3x, right? That's what they want to get here. So
stick with us. This is getting in. I know this is getting in the weeds, but
I'll back out of it because I think we're getting too deep. But
basically, what he's saying is, borrowing the money and then leveraging with equity as well makes it a more enticing deal. That is a pill that everybody can swallow, because when you're dealing with VC or investment funds or things like that, they have to hit a certain rate of return in order for the deal to make sense. So this makes the deal make more sense and a little cheaper.
It's cheaper, and they can do more deals with their money. And sometimes funding just falls through. Like sometimes the bank isn't going to approve the loan.
Which is hard now, I'm sure.
It is harder now. So if the bank doesn't approve the loan, they're doing they're modeling based upon, hey, I can borrow this amount.
Yeah.
And if that amount changes to a smaller amount or to zero, the deal doesn't make sense to them anymore. So funding is another reason.
Yeah, if I think I'm getting 10 million, now I'm only getting 7, that's a big problem.
It can be.
Or that's something that has to be overcome.
And frankly, they can put more money into their own money. If it's a fund, they've got it. But that changes the deal. Does it make sense in their model anymore? Oftentimes it won't. So they either retrade it or they have to abandon the deal. So that it's usually something like that. In diligence, sometimes you have like environmental challenge. Say you have a landscaping business that has gas tanks, to fill the lawnmowers, and they get sloppy with it, and it's created an environmental issue. That kind of a business is always going to have environmental due diligence. That's part of it. And if it comes up with, an issue and you've contaminated a water stream, that's a really big issue that you have to mitigate.
We're not buying your dirty laundry.
Right. And it could be a multi-million-dollar challenge. And so you've got to mitigate that. So the seller has to mitigate it regardless, right? So it makes that transaction pretty toxic. There's a lot of reasons why deals fall through, but
Mhm.
usually it's because the earnings don't prove out or the buyer can't find the funding.
And so part of the reason that I asked that question too, and not to plug you guys too much, but that's why it's probably so important too to bring you guys in early on if somebody is trying to sell a business, because they're looking back years, they're interviewing people, these due diligence processes when they're spending millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, et cetera,
Yeah.
is lengthy. So it's not like I'm sure you're selling a business in 2 or 3 months. It's, maybe if you have, it wrapped up in a nice shiny bow, but that's probably 2 or 3 years of work that you've put in prior to that to get to that point where it can be wrapped up nicely.
So we don't do a lot of grooming. So,
Okay.
folks will
That's
engage.
what I was inquiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So folks will engage us to sell the business. So,
Okay.
when they engage us, we do a deep dive.
Hmm.
So we dig into their financials, we dig into the story, we do third party research to make sure there aren't like unknown lawsuits and things
Hmm.
like that. Doesn't mean we can't take them to market.
Pesky lawyers.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Hmm.
don't get me started on lawyers. I know too many of them in my
Fair
life.
enough.
But we do a lot of that work. We prep the financials. We spread them. We look for
Hmm.
owner add backs. If you put your cell phone through the business and all these kinds of like owner benefits that you sort of fund your lifestyle through the business.
You bought your plane through the business.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't, but no,
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't have a plane.
I got it. Yeah.
To be
Yeah.
clear. So,
But
but if you were to
examples. Yeah.
do that, the buyer's not going to let you, fund your private school from the business.
Your Eddie V's bill
Right.
is monthly. Eddie V's bill is
Exactly.
paid by the
Exactly.
company for
Exactly. So
business dinners.
post close, that's
Yeah.
not happening. So
Yeah.
that's an add back. So, if you're at 2 million in EBITDA and you've got $1 million of just spending money through the business, that's actually $3 million of EBITDA, and that's justifiable.
Hmm.
That's how we sort of, and we look at EBITDA in this world.
Yeah.
It's how banks lend. It's kind of like you can do it off of other metrics like cash flow, but that can get clunky. So that is typically how we measure it.
Cash flow is a weird thing. Yeah. Because it just can be so manipulated, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
With that being said, when does, I know we talked about life, occurrences and things like that, which is, a better reason to sell than not. What makes a business, I guess, attractive from an EBITDA standpoint? Like, if you're doing $500,000 in EBITDA, you're probably not very attractive. You just may want to sell it through a normal business broker. But like, when do you guys start looking at deals where it's like, okay, 2, 3, 5, 10 million? When does it start looking for, a firm like you to get involved?
So most of our core market is sort of 1 million in EBITDA to about 10 million in EBITDA.
Mhm.
And then our middle market team is 10 million and up.
Mhm.
And we don't really touch much stuff that's above 30 million in EBITDA. That's not really our world. It's a very capable.
And is that just because of the additional hurdles, et cetera?
It's really because
I'm
of the
sure there's a lot of
opportunity.
moving part. Yeah.
It's the opportunity. I don't want to sound disparaging, but that sort of lower middle market, that 1 to 10 million in EBITDA, is not capably served.
Mhm.
There are just a lot of folks who will mask themselves as business brokers that mostly sell real estate.
Mhm.
And a business transaction is just very complicated.
Can't you we'll sell the company too. I know you're trying to sell the business. We'll just sell the company with
Right.
it. Like,
And frankly, they're allowed to.
Yeah, of course.
As a business, as a realtor in Florida, you can be a business broker. The challenge is that these are very nuanced. I mean, there's challenges that happen in an M&A transaction that have nothing to do with real estate. I mean, if you're a real estate person, how are you going to handle a cost of capital, a working capital peg,
Mhm.
and go through monthly balance sheets and figure out what the capital requirements of this business are going forward? That's not something you deal with. And it's not because you're not smart enough. It's because you don't see it. So that is one of the
Okay,
challenges.
we'll cut our closing costs.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why we stick sort of that 1 to 10 and then 10 to maybe 30. Once you get above 30 million, you're getting, Goldman Sachs might look at it. You're getting some really credible names. That's very capably served, that market. Those sort of $500 million to multi-billion dollars, it's well served by
And
really credible banks.
with that too, doesn't it get a little harder, I would say? Is there, to sell as well? Once you're starting
Up market or down market?
the up market, 30, 50. I mean, there's only so many, people or funds, et cetera, that can
So
buy.
yes and no, actually. I mean,
Really?
so
Okay. Tell me
those
about
are
that.
easier deals. because
Really?
yeah,
Okay.
because they're professionally done. I mean, so you have a
You're not
real
doing $50 million in EBITDA or $30 million in EBITDA, not knowing what you're doing.
right. So you've got a
Yeah.
real C-suite. You've got an
Yeah.
established. Usually, you brought in a CFO and a CEO who have done this before, who now who have boards. Like there's an
Mhm.
advisory board, there's a board of
Guys, I can't wait
directors.
to have this problem and
Exact
telling
exactly,
the partners.
exactly. So that's the difference is that these are professionally run. They get audited every single year. They have to do reporting
Yeah,
infrastructures in
filing
place and
requirements, yeah.
everything. Versus down market, it's a lot like sort of clunkier. I mean, it requires really digging in. We have to get under the hood aggressively and dig in. And sometimes we're sort of gap fillers in these deals. So, buyers asking for, what's your AR aging? And, and a seller saying, what is that? Why is he asking me that? I don't even know what that is. And that makes total sense. They
Hey, or
wouldn't
like
know.
accounts receivable, we got money coming in every month,
Well,
like,
that's it. So we translate. We fill
how
gaps and we
much?
translate. We just say, listen, all he's asking for is your billings. He wants to understand that you're billing and collecting,
Mhm.
right? That cycle. How quickly you're collecting on your bills. That's how you fund your business. That's all. He just doesn't know how to ask the question in seller speak. So we do
Mhm.
a lot of translation work. It's just a different sort of world. Up market, those deals are different. They're also not as hard because they don't have these they're not tied by emotions. One of the biggest challenges in a deal down market is the emotional component. Someone who's got a $100 million EBITDA business that's going to sell for $1.2 billion is generally not the founder, could be, but generally not the founder, and is not as emotionally attached to the business as
Really?
that
So
person
they're
down
rarely
market.
the founder at that point. That's
Yeah,
interesting. Okay.
at that point. I mean, I'm not talking about the unicorns that go to $1 billion
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
quickly. Most of these, it
Ring
takes a
doorbell
long
or
time.
something, yeah.
Right, yeah,
Yeah,
think of
it's
the ones in
rare.
California. You don't get these ones that, take 30 years and all of a sudden are $1 billion. That
Mhm.
doesn't happen very often. It can, but
Well, they probably would have got picked off before that point anyway, or approached, etcetera.
almost certainly. I mean, they're getting approached. I've got people getting approached, daily. I get clients sending me emails. I've got an offer today from some random person and okay, I'll deal with it. And we'll have that conversation. That's not a real offer.
So, I guess it's just, being understanding, dealing with the emotions and things like that. I'm sure there's a lot of interesting conversations, especially because how we originally started the podcast, it's definitely possible to get to, $5-10 million with, a 10, 15, 20 person crew. So I'm sure it's interesting to be like, hey, I know Susie's been doing your books for 20 years and she's your cousin, but Susie's kind of may not be, et cetera, et cetera.
It's a
And yeah.
challenge. Yeah. So one of the biggest threats to a
So I'm sure
deal,
it's as much as
yeah,
knowledge base as it is, psychology,
no doubt.
human, emotional IQ is what I'm trying to get at.
100%. I mean, and frankly, we've seen accountants especially be a threat to deals more than
Why
almost
so?
any other. So the lawyer on a transaction is brought in transactionally, right?
Hmm.
So they're brought in sort of at the signing of the LOI. They take it through to closing. They do all the documentation, and then they close. And
We're
that
paper pushers. I
yeah,
mean,
well,
yeah.
that relationship is 3-4 months. Like
Hmm. Yeah.
that's it. Like usually there's no relationship before and there's no relationship after. An accountant might have been there for 30 years and might view you as an annuity. And that's hard to say, but someone
Yeah.
who counts on, $10,000 a month from your business and has for 3 decades, and then all of a sudden you're going to sell your business, that person, that one-man band is unlikely to be the accountant when a private equity fund or a multinational
And they're not the
corporation buys it,
cheerleader.
and they know it. They know it. And
Okay.
and I don't know that they do it on purpose. I don't think they're sabotaging on purpose, but, slow to provide information, being a little more obstinate in the discussions, and it's a real challenge. So when we see that you have a one-man band that's been with you for 30 years, that is not going to showcase their skills well enough to be, accepted by a private
Hmm.
equity fund or a buyer, we know that's going to be a problem. And
Yeah.
we tend to have a conversation with our client at the very front end. We have very tight customer relationships. Our clients rely on us for guidance, and we try to call it like we see it, and we do it gently when we can, and sometimes bluntly when we have to. But we see a threat to a deal, and we let them know. And now, oftentimes, they say, "Yeah, I'm willing to roll the dice," because that's a tight relationship,
Hmm.
and we get it. And sometimes it's a family member, which is even worse,
I can imagine. Yeah.
who's not an equity holder, so isn't going to benefit from the deal. It's a challenge. It's a real challenge.
How do you, so with that being said, we kind of touched on that, just dealing with emotional sellers. I mean, it sounds like just being upfront, addressing issues, being transparent. I mean, just like with any business, but obviously, having that, emotional IQ where you can just kind of read the situation and know how to navigate.
Yes, the EQ matters there for sure. I think it's about empathy.
Hmm.
I think it's just about listening to them as a person. We get a lot of reps. I mean, we're really good at what we do because we get a lot of repetitions.
Hmm.
So what I had this conversation with a client yesterday, again, who experienced a loss, and he wanted to make a decision, like make a big decision. And I just said, I would encourage you to take the weekend. I have a business trip for the first 3 days of next week. Let's talk on Thursday.
Hmm.
It gave him a week. And I said, don't ruminate on it. Don't constantly think about it. Just sit with it. And if you have the same decision a week from now, then we'll attack that position. We'll go hard charging at it. But I think for us, it's just about listening to people and kind of meeting them where they are and bringing empathy and talking to them like, like a person and hearing them. You have to listen because when they're struggling with something, whether it's their legacy or whatever it happens to be, if you're listening to them, um, they know it and they recognize that you're not just trying to get a deal out of them, that you're trying to help them. And I think the repetitions and just treating them like a human being is probably the best strategy. I don't know that that's a strategy, but that's how you deal with people. If someone in your life, whether they're a good friend or not, has experienced a traumatic event, your response is to bring empathy.
I've had this conversation so many times, and I tell people I try to talk to you like a friend or a family member or somebody that is close to me when I talk to clients. And, we have hard conversations every day
Yeah.
and, they'll see a billboard and see that it was, oh, $5 million verdict or something like that. And it's like, well, why can't I get $5 million? And it's like, well, because you went to the doctor 3 times. And obviously it's put more delicately than that. But at the end of the day, hey, if they're offering you X and this is, this, it very much comes down to numbers. I mean, that's how civil litigation works. When you try to put that as somebody that does care and has that, kind of, understanding of the position, hey, I understand where you're coming from as well. It does go so much better than rather being, transactional. This is it. This is what it is. Take it or leave it. Now more than ever, people don't respond to that.
I agree. And for me, I mean, everything starts with empathy for me because I've been in their shoes. So
Hmm.
I've been an investment banker for 11 years.
Hmm.
I'm 50, almost 3 years old. I was on the buy side. I was on the sell side. I've been on boards directing a transaction. I'd never been the guy in the middle until 11 years ago. So what I bring to the table is empathy because I've been in all of their shoes. So I can think like a buyer and I can think like a seller or a seller or a business operator because I've been those. I think so I hire for that as well. Like when I brought in transaction directors, I bring in people who have owned businesses and have been on the buy side so that they can really understand what that person is going through because, behind that sort of hard charging just obstinate person on one side of a transaction is a person who's going through something
Hmm.
and
100%.
and they're trying to achieve something. And, you have to just kind of dial back all that emotion. But if you can bring the empathy, you can sit in their shoes and anticipate a position or a challenge before it actually happens.
Of course. And I think that's so true. And just, like you said, I mean, it prevents so many problems and so much opposition
Yeah,
if you come at things the right way.
definitely.
You have seen, obviously many CEOs, many C-suite people talk to a lot of very successful, wealthy, just overachievers. Could you talk about a little bit of the mindset that you see with these people? Like, what do you see are common qualities that just make them different and just bound for success, I guess, for lack of better terms?
That's a really good question. So I think they cut out the noise better than most.
Really? Okay.
They focus on signal and not noise. So the things that sort of matter, I boil it. My wife is an operational guru. Like she's
Hmm.
great at this stuff, and she talks about critical path a lot. So I've kind of stolen that from her. Critical path is the things that are absolutely critical to get from A to B. Right? You're trying to solve a problem. Anything that's not on the critical path needs to be subsumed by things that are on the critical path. So I think people who are, those A players focus on what's important and ignore those that are not. I also, and uh, I've read a little bit about sort of AA, some of the mindset. I'm not an alcoholic, fortunately, but I think that the training is incredible. Some
Hmm.
of the tenets they have is incredible. One of the things they use is called control the controllables. And I think people who are those kinds of folks know what they can control and attack that. Those vectors that are within their control, they attack. Those that are outside of their influence, they don't ignore, but they recognize they have very little impact on them, and they sort of accept them and mitigate them if they can. So I think those are some of the skills that I've seen in these people. They're hard charging. They don't get distracted. They always have their mind on the goal. We could go probably for an entire podcast.
Yeah. I guess what you're saying is number one is they're goal oriented, but number two is they recognize the path of least resistance to get there and cut out the nonsense on the side of the road. If you want to use a
So I wouldn't
driving
say
metaphor,
least resistance.
it may or
Actually,
not in least
yeah,
resistance,
yeah,
but they don't try to, I guess, maybe throw extra people in the mix that don't need to be there. I'm probably not saying that as well as I can. Well, let me put it this way.
yeah.
I went to a recent seminar in Tampa. There was this guy Daniel G. I'm a big fan. That's why I'm name dropping. It's a younger guy, he's a sales guy out of Miami, and he's one of those coaches' kids and stuff. Kind
Sure.
of deal.
Yeah. Love it.
Dude's just like completely high energy, gets the people going and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And he was talking about, he goes, you're driving to work, somebody's tailgating you, cut you off or something like that. He goes, are you willing to die over that? And I was like, what? This dude, where are we going with this? And he said, are you willing to get in a whole big argument, derail your day, delay yourself from getting to work, all this or do you just get over or just ignore it?
Right.
And we all, everybody wants to be proud and respected and tough and things like that. But it's, more about just getting the mission accomplished rather than just throwing in all this extra baggage is probably what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say. You have a client that, and I've dealt with it, plenty of times. Somebody texts you at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, ready to, breathing fire and, mad at the world that day. And it happens. They're going through a lot. I'm going to solve the problem and I'm going to move on and I'm going to move on with my day. I'm not, and they probably don't even mean it at me anyway.
Right.
And it took me a long time to figure that out. But these little things, you can't let it affect you from, reaching the goal. And again, it's, not to get biblical, but it's the verse. My mom repeats it to me all the time, control the things you can control and the rest, let go. And I'm kind of butchering that a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's so true. I mean, I agree with you that they just kind of, hey, I don't need to deal with that. Or somebody else can deal with that.
Right. Or it's not relevant.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so either you deal with it or you don't, or you delegate it or you don't, but you focus on the things that are impactful. Right. I mean, that's what my goal for this year and beyond is, to be not someone who is, sort of day to day doing the mundane things, because I'm bad at that. I get bored easily. I want to do things that are high impact, and that I can dive in and out of, because that's where I'm my highest and best use is to come in and solve a problem, or usually I don't solve it. I actually extract the problem out of other people. I was trained to do that as a VC. I'm actually bad at solving the problem. I'm good at getting you to solve the problem for some reason.
I'm very much the opposite.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah. So that very much the opposite. I dive in and I'm like, let me fix this as quickly as possible, and think horrible until recently at delegating. So that's why I was asking you those questions.
It's hard to do, right? I mean, I think, but if you want to build a business to succeed yourself, and even beyond that, if you want to be more than an individual contributor, even a great one, there are some individual contributors that make a ton of money and make a huge impact, but they're never going to manage people effectively. If you want to get to the point where you are a lever, you've got to start empowering other people. And you have to recognize that if someone gets it done slower and maybe not quite as well, it might be good enough. And maybe you can, as an editor,
that was a huge
and fix it. Maybe fix it a little bit, or better yet, have them fix it with a few guiding points, right? That's what coaching is about, and that's what leadership and management is
100%.
about. So, but it's, I get it. It's, we're not born as someone who is good at something, but lets other people do it for them. We want to establish credibility. That's what you do when you're younger. And, I built this model. I did it in my head, and I finally sort of plotted it out. Like, there are two things you can give an organization. You can give them your time, and you give them your expertise. And it's a curve over time. So early in your career, you have an incredible amount of time and no expertise. So you work 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And over time, by doing that, you accrue a lot of expertise. But also as you get older, you start hopping into kids and wives and those kinds of things. And your time constraints are more, right? So you have less time to give, but your expertise is meaningfully higher. And over time, those kind of curves kind of intersect. And that's when you're at sort of maximum value where you've got enough time on task where you're an
When those
assassin.
intersect at the highest level.
Right.
Yeah.
You're an assassin at that point. You can do so much. You've got so much, and you have enough time where you're an impact player. That's probably a 3 or 4 year period. It's a
Mhm.
really small chunk. Um, but that's the thing. So I'm at that point where I really want to be doing high impact stuff, but not spend 60, 70 hours a week anymore. I don't really want to do that anymore. I don't think I'm great after about 50 or 60 hours anymore. I can do it, but I'm not at my best.
I think that's been one of the biggest eye-opening things. I kind of, obviously on a personal level with the partners in my firm being very, very, very much older than me.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
they're old.
Yeah,
Jeez, especially
so
boiled.
yeah, gosh. But like seeing that has kind of been like a glimpse at my future because they all have kids
Yeah.
and different age kids too. So it's kind of a glimpse of my future and seeing how they navigate that. So that's been kind of a cool, side thing as well outside of the business, obviously, to see that like playbook of like, hey, what works, what doesn't. So I've been watching intently on that as well. And obviously, we all still work very, very hard, but it's interesting to see how, what they put value on and how everybody progresses through their life. So me, I'll still, obviously I love seeing my kids and spending time with my kids, but I can still grind out the, 60,
Yeah.
70-hour weeks or, do emails at, 2:00 in the morning, cause I'm feeding one of them or hanging out with the other one or whatever, cause they don't want to sleep, which is too often now.
Yeah.
But it is very interesting to see that playbook and then how that, you were talking about the intersection, probably not to, over detail or overcomplicate your analogy, but that intersection probably comes too at the time when you most care. Like you kept on talking about impact and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It's probably even a third intersection of like, I care the most. I'm trying to make, I have a little bit of time left and expertise.
Yeah.
So because plenty of people may have the time and the expertise, but they're later on in life where their care is just kind of like, eh.
And it's more focus, I think,
Yeah.
because I think you hopefully you're
Well, you know what you want,
right.
probably.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think hopefully you're like a lifelong learner.
Hmm.
That's my thing. I want to learn something every day. I'm not a finished product. I never
That's why I do the
think,
podcast.
yeah,
Yeah.
sure, absolutely. And I think that makes sense. Like that third component does make sense because I think you're more focused on, what you want and what you can deliver. And I think early on you care about your career, but you don't really know where you're going.
Hmm.
And I think at that point, and that's probably in like late 40s, early 50s. I'm probably I'm in the tail end of it, I guess.
Hmm.
I think that's when you know where you're really effective and how you want to deploy that. And you care desperately about that.
That's very
I think you
interesting.
care early, but you care about just getting better and getting more and more and more exposure and getting smarter and meeting the right people. But it's not focused. It's just like, I want to get to where that guy
I'm
is.
just throwing it against the wall and seeing
Yeah.
what sticks. I know what wall I'm throwing it
Right.
against, more or less. I'm not throwing it here or there. I know I'm throwing it here, but I'm just throwing everything at it.
Right.
And so you've mentioned impact multiple times. I think
Yeah.
we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about, obviously, the Benchmark International Arena.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, just how that came about, your involvement in the community, being in Tampa Bay and all the great things you guys do?
Sure. Absolutely. It's quite an investment for us. And I mean that as an investment. So if you just look at other folks who have their name on a stadium and an arena, we're talking about Bank of America and Citibank, and these are multinational
It's incredible.
conglomerates.
Yeah.
These are publicly traded monster companies. We're not that. We're tightly held. We're a small business. We're not small, but
Mhm.
we are not that big of a business. We have 15 offices on 3 continents, but still a pretty small business. When the Lightning approached us, we chuckled first. And then we started thinking, we'd never really marketed ourselves broadly. We are very good
I
at
want to
what we do.
highlight that real quick.
Yeah,
You were approached, or the group was approached.
we were.
That's a huge honor.
We were. Yeah, we certainly felt honored. But we are not that profile.
Hmm.
We had never done really a broad-based marketing campaign. We have an incredible marketing team. What you see, the visuals you see is all from Brittany and her team. They're
That's
incredible
great.
at it. But we've never taken our story broadly. And we would find out about deals getting done locally and we didn't even know about them because people didn't know who we were or what we did. So we started thinking about, okay, do we make this investment? And again, investment, it's not a line item on a marketing spend like for Citibank. This is one line item in a gigantic $100 million, $200 million marketing budget. This is a capital investment off the balance sheet, not off the income statement for us. So we made that decision because, one, we wanted to get our story out there. We'd lost some deals because people didn't know who we were. The prospective client loved us, loved our story, thought we were really good at what we did. But the three others we were competing against, they knew who they were. Their buddies knew who they were, and they wanted to be able to say, "Hey, I went to market with X."
So and so,
I
yeah,
won't breathe life
yeah.
into those names, but yeah. And so we wanted to make sure we got our story out there. That was the first thing. The second thing is that we love this area. Like we're rooted in Tampa and Tampa Bay, and I live in St. Pete, but we are rooted in this community, and we wanted folks to know how proud we are to be here, and we wanted to invest back into the community, and we thought this is a great way to do it. And then the third thing is that when we look at partnership, we've never really partnered with another firm. We hold our brand at such a level, such a high level and such esteem. We didn't want to cede control of it to anyone else. We didn't want to entrust our story, our brand, and our future to someone else. We did some diligence on these guys, on the Vinik Sports Group, on Mr. Vinik. They're the best organization in sports.
Oh, they're incredible. Yeah.
They run the best arena in the world. They're world class. Everyone you talk to says these guys are all first class. It's all we've experienced so far. It's just first class. So that was kind of our rubric. It's like, okay, check that box. Like the Vinik Sports Group, Mr. Vinik, Doug and the Blue Owl team who own most of Vinik Sports Group now, just top notch people, great reputation.
Yeah, we're kind of getting married. We'd never been married before. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm sure that was
do some
that was a
diligence.
scary or involved process too. It's like
It was, but of course, you know what we do for a living. We know how to do diligence.
you
Like
knew how
so,
to vet it
we
yourself.
we
Yeah.
did we did we danced for almost a year. I mean, this
Wow.
is
Okay.
a
Yeah.
long time. And there was conviction on both sides.
Hmm.
But we're also deal doers on both sides. Blue Owl owns Vinik Sports Group. Those guys have 50 plus $1 billion funds. So they know how to do deals. So do we. So there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of redlining of documents, and
Oh,
no one
sure.
wanted to lose the negotiation.
Lawyers.
But we
Yeah.
got there. I mean, we got there and we're incredibly, happy. We've already seen a lot of returns in terms of,
Great.
folks coming to us. And so, we're proud to be a member of this community. And now I think we're showing it.
That's absolutely incredible. And I was so excited to, knowing, you and, obviously deep diving into your company and what you guys do. And then making that investment into the community being Tampa Bay based. I mean, that's huge. It's not like you're and I'm not saying that obviously you wouldn't take it as a dig, but it's not like, blah, blah, blah bank that's based out of, New York, California, et cetera,
Right.
coming in to spend marketing dollars, because it's a line item in that budget. And hey, we got a naming opportunity. This was really you guys saying, hey, listen, we want to support Tampa. Great opportunity for us, obviously,
Yeah,
but we want to be partners with Tampa Bay.
that's right.
Want to touch on you were telling me your own podcast coming out soon, which we're happy to share that. Tell me a little bit about when that's starting and what's going on.
Yeah, appreciate that. So it looks like we're going to launch in February. We've
Hmm.
talked about this for something like 8 years.
Well, I can imagine the
Yeah,
guests. It's not hard to,
yeah.
pull guests, I
Yeah,
guess.
we could probably get some pretty interesting guests for sure. And I think we've tried to figure out who would actually do it, and
Hmm.
no one raised their hand. And sort of, as I get to this
Who
point
would
in my
host it,
career,
you mean?
yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, there's only a couple of folks that were in contention, and we were all so busy. And I'm going to be moving into sort of different roles in the
Hmm.
organization, and it's going to allow me, sort of free me up to do something like this. And I've started doing some speaking engagements and some panels, and I think what we're trying to do is sort of as a partnership with the arena opportunity get our name out there in other ways, and also sort of just showcase some of the incredible people that we have working for us. And I've started doing some videos on LinkedIn, maybe a couple months ago, and
Hmm.
got some traction there. I'd never really activated that network. I've had it for 20 years and did nothing with it. And I just started, and some prospective clients have reached out to us, and it's gone, I guess, better than I expected it to. And it was just like an epiphany, like, wait, this is how people market now. This is how you secure new clients now, is that you use these video feeds like YouTube, short form YouTube. And we were just sort of losing out on this incredible opportunity. And so I raised my hand and said, I'll do it.
That's amazing.
And what it'll do is we'll tell these stories, these incredibly rich stories of business owners that are trying to monetize their life's work. And I think we'll talk about what's happening in the macro and how that sort of will impact the micro of our prospective clients' worlds, and bring in some thought leaders. And I think it's going to be, hopefully there's going to be value there. I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun. We built a podcast studio, and
Amazing. I
I'm
love it.
taking pictures of your setup here, so
Yeah.
we can maybe incorporate some of the technology and ideas you have. But yeah, we're excited.
It's so much fun. And, people ask me all the time, why did you, start a podcast? And it was really, and I'm very forthcoming with it. It was selfish reasons, because I'm like, one, I wanted to highlight Tampa Bay, obviously very similarly, and all the amazing people that we have, in the area. But two, I was like, how else am I going to talk to these incredible people? And every episode keeps getting better and better, and ask these kind of pointed questions. And it's been, we were talking about being lifetime learners. I mean, there's been, and I'll go back and watch episodes 2 or 3 times, because it's so interesting to hear somebody's story, what they've been through. And there's obviously a lot of similarities, with, guests and successful people that I've seen, but there's a lot of differences as well.
Yeah.
And it's been truly rewarding. And I can't thank you enough for coming on today.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
We are going to make sure that we have Dara's LinkedIn in the details below the description. So make sure you add him on there. We're going to make sure we have the contact for Benchmark International. So if you guys ever have any, selling business, acquiring businesses, etc., they are an incredible, obviously, resource and can help you through that process. And thank you guys again. It's obviously, as we end these episodes, it is no accident that Dara is as successful as he is. And we will see you guys on the next one. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I enjoyed it.